Hi, everybody. It's CryptoBurb Adrian speaking. Welcome to another episode of the Nest Show podcast. Today, we are going to open up to brand new topics that we haven't really ever, touched upon, at least in the most recent past, if you will. We're going to talk about mental health, the importance of keeping your mentality in the good place, to keep your mentality really going and open towards the positivity, towards how it can actually just structure your overall persistence in the world of trading, but not only an inside trading kind of like merits. We are going to discuss more broadly how the mental health can impact you, yourself, and the reality around you. And today on the show, I've got a very interesting and very intriguing guest, Molls, or known on Twitter as well as the artist coach. So Molls is going to talk to us about the Unminding Mental Health Project. Right, this is a very interesting concept that has been recently started, and I'm pretty sure that myself and a lot of viewers and listeners to the podcast would also love to hear a little bit more about you, Mos, and about the Unmining project. Can you give us some bills about that?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me as a guest. And it's nice to get to kind of meet you face to face. Um, the Unminding Project is a free mental health project that Jem says and I created. We we kind of I started working with Jem a couple of years ago, and she found that it really, really helped her. And we've spent a lot of time discussing what I'm going to share with you today. We had a lot of sessions. She's done a lot of my groups, so she's been a lot of group work with me. And it just felt like it's such an important time in the world to really focus on mental health. And, people really are suffering more than ever. The services, especially in this country, have been really cut. So there isn't people just can't get the help. They wait months for referrals. So what we found was actually let's just try something. Let's just see if there's something that we can do, something we can put together. And it was really kind of organic. It was like we mentioned it, and then we thought, well, let's do a spaces, and we did a spaces. And then we felt like, okay, well, that went really well. What should we call it? I mean, we didn't have the name before we started. And then, the Unminding Project came up as a name. And we're like, that's a really good name. We'll go with that. And it's kind of built from there. As I said, it's free to you, free for everybody. We do spaces every Thursday evening. We have a Telegram chat. People hit us up in DMs and ask questions and ask for help. And that's just what we wanted to provide for the community. So we run on donations. Siri from Cope has been one of our main sponsors, so I just want to shout out to him. And yeah, we've just found that we started off with a small spaces, and the one this week, I think we had 300 people listening. So it's growing, it's really growing, and it's really effective. So we're really
That
pleased
is
doing it.
that is very good to hear that. It's getting more and more attention. I do personally only can agree with what you're sharing in terms of the need for this space, especially for the crypto people, because Jem, definitely as a as your partner in the project, originates, at least to the best of my knowledge, from the crypto side of the things. We met, myself and Jim met, some time ago in the crypto Twitter space. And those people, like, who participate actively in the crypto sphere when there's so much dynamic, so much volatility, so much exposure to danger, to risk in terms of the finances, this definitely does cause a lot of emotional roller coasters on the way. And I've seen so many people, getting extremely unbalanced in terms of their mental health out there. That is just so, I should say, depressing to even look at it. So many people are going really depressed over the course of the past years, especially since the pandemic started. So, talking, in general about the mental health, like, are there any uh, basics? Let's say I'm a complete newbie, right, to the merit. I've been dealing. Let's assume I've been dealing with some mental, unease going on, some
Mm.
stress. Are there any basics, any facts that I can refer to just to kick off my journey?
Well, I think the difference in what we teach, and I've been doing this, by the way, for 8 years. I've been teaching this understanding. is that so many therapies, and I'm not going to discount them, think different things work for different people, but many therapies look at the content of the mind. They'll look at what the mind is saying, trying to fix the mind, try and fix thought, try and think positive. That it's like a manipulation of thought, a manipulation of the mind. And while sometimes that can have a temporary fix, it doesn't always have a very lasting fix. So what we tend to do in this understanding, it goes a bit deeper. So we're not looking at what you think, we're looking at the fact that you think, and then we observe what thought actually is. Okay, so Stanford University in America said we have 100,000 thoughts a day when they studied the mind. That's a lot of thinking. And there's a certain teacher that I love called Eckhart Tolle. Some people might have heard of him. He's kind of an enlightened man, a spiritual teacher. And in his observations, he says that 98% of thought is useless. So if we have 100,000 thoughts a day, 98,000 of them are probably not that helpful. Now, what tends to happen, there's some thinking that we have personally that bothers us, that looks real, that feels like when we get it, it causes us pain, it causes us suffering. And we may attach that thinking to the outside world, but also what we do with this understanding is we bring it to a deeper space. We say, what if that thinking isn't true? So the whole of the process of what I do is really undoing people's relationship with thinking and their thoughts, rather than getting into the thought and trying to dissect it and trying to work out what it's saying and giving it meaning. If anything, we give thought less meaning. It's coming back to the neutrality of what thought is. And that can be really helpful, because if you think how caught up we get, how much we all overthink in this world, at this time, to actually have something where you can step back and be the observer of your thinking is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a little bit as if it had to do, some deeper connection going on with the NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming. Is that right?
NLP is fascinating, and I am a fan of it. But NLP will look at one certain area. Okay, it will take a certain thing, a certain fear, a certain area of your life where there may be struggle, and it will manipulate, and it does do something. Um, but this is deeper. This is still, see, NLP would still be working with the content. And I'm
Okay.
going to say, what about going a bit deeper, and maybe you don't have to work with the content. Maybe the content's always going to do what it's doing. The mind will always fill a vacuum. That's what the mind does. So it will fill it with things that really aren't true. So this void as soon as there's a vacuum in the mind, it will be filled with thought. Now, so much thought doesn't mean anything to us. So much thought is just noise. And so if we can come back to the fact that it's noise, and we can observe that and we can see that, then our thoughts can't harm us. We step out of the suffering of the mind. And that's the point where this, because it's really helpful for everybody to know, but the point where it becomes really helpful is in the realm of mental health, because most people's mental health issues are because they're believing thought, and that suffering creates certain feelings, and people can become scared of their own thinking. They have a terrible relationship with their own thinking. They think they're a bad person because of their own thinking, and this just undoes that. It's like a stripping away of what's not true to leave more of the essence of the person.
Okay, I'm just while you were explaining that to me, I wasn't really too much aware. Like, I'm somewhat aware of what NLP is and what it does. I definitely do not have enough, or I should say, experience to start with, or knowledge in the overall deeper, uh, well, context, just like you mentioned, for the mental health. And while you're talking, I actually just typed in, to Google the mental health, like for the definition, to search for the definition, and one of the first links that just appears actually gives, this is for the understanding, for the context of the viewers and the listeners, that mental health, includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Mental health is important at every stage of our life, from childhood and adolescence through adulthood. Right? Uh, is this really true that the way you think, that the mental health really is such a dynamic creation, is such a dynamic matter, that it keeps evolving for your entire life, or is it that you kind of like what do you grow up with, in terms of the customs, that the behaviors that you get, that it stays and sticks with you for the rest of your life? Is it changing?
Changing, changing, because
Okay.
I for myself, I was, how I came into this was because I suffered from some mental health issues in my late 30s, so around kind of like 15 years ago. So, and I've been really mentally healthy, I felt, up until then, no more than the odd, sad day or a bit of stress, and then I did get a mental health problem, and so and now I haven't got one, so my mental health has definitely changed over the course of my life. Now, what we tend to have, what does build is a lot of the beliefs we have, a lot of the thoughts we have turn into something that becomes much more fixed. So we become more fixed as a person as we grow older, and sometimes that can lead to problems because life may not look the way we thought it would look, or there's all different
Mhm.
areas where thought can really become so fixed that we beat ourselves up over it, and ultimately, if we understood thought, that doesn't need to happen. And I guess what I'm pointing to here is if you can understand that thought is transient, thought comes and goes, and a lot of that thinking that is unhelpful to you or may cause a problem for you, if you just didn't believe it, it wouldn't. So it's your, again, it's back to this relationship with thought rather than what thought is saying.
Mhm. Okay, I got your point.
Yeah.
Would you say, well, having gone at least partially, but hopefully fully through the COVID pandemic, right? Having about 2 years going so far, hopefully seeing the end of it all very soon. Do you see any specific like tendencies, trends going on? Is there any? Could you argue that people overall have got worsened on their mental health side throughout the pandemic?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say that the in my opinion, the media have stoked fear rather than calm it. And I think many people live their lives around what the media tell them as truth. I kind of tend not to be one of those people, but many people do. And I think the fear psychosis that was coming out of the TV every day has definitely led to worse mental health for many people. And I think one of the things that I have found is that really with that certain age groups, the younger children maybe weren't so aware, but teens and those kind of ages where they really should have been out there living their lives, and they're being stuck in their house, and they're being consumed with this, like, you're going to kill your grandparents if you give them COVID. And there was so much of a narrative around fear that I think it has actually damaged people's mental health. But where I come from, it's slightly different, because what I would say is, well, actually, you're not damaged, and you may have the appearance that it's damaged your mind, but it's just thinking that you believe isn't true. So again, as I would undo that thought and that thinking would fall away, they would come back to being mentally healthy. Is this all
Okay.
making sense?
Yeah. I mean,
Good.
because the truthfully, the truth is, at least from in my surrounding, in my environment, that people have been locked up in their homes for such a long time with such an such a you know such a lack of stimuli coming from the outside, like the social stimuli, right? We are talking about the lack of socialization with the other people, like inability to go to the pubs, the clubs, inability to talk face to face. We seem to have gone full digital, at least way more than we used to be, right? So I'm like, in my environment, I'm seeing that a lot of social connections, and a lot of social, I should say, well, yeah, connections, paths, people that we know, are not really the same anymore, right? It seems to overall have brought so much impact, that more often than not it seems to be more negative than positive. So
Mm.
I kind of like, at least in Poland, in my environment, I do observe similar points, to what you're sharing, how does it look in in your place where you're staying right now? Is it actually getting back to normal right now, or people are still feeling not really free to go
It,
anywhere?
it feels pretty normal here now, to be honest. I mean, we definitely went through our phases when it was not, but I would say because we've been open for quite a long time, we didn't have any lockdowns over Christmas this year or last year, and our restrictions were lifted quite early in the year. That people have, see what's really interesting is people have kind of adapted again back to some kind of new normal. Although you do still see the odd person in a mask and I'm sure there are people that aren't leaving their homes because they're still scared, but I'm not going to have contact with those people because they're not out there. But generally, pubs are full, clubs are up and running. Yeah, people just seem to be slowly transitioning back into a normal life here.
But has it changed forever? Like, is it ever going to get back to normal in terms of the mental health that the people had used to have, before the pandemics kicked in? Is it something you can recover, in your opinion?
Well, I think mental health is completely recoverable. I believe that whether the world will look the same, I'm not so sure. But recovery, absolutely. I see what I teach. I'm of the belief that nobody's actually broken anyway, and as soon as I get them to see that, there isn't a mental health problem. So again, it's a little bit of a shift. It's something a little bit different. So I truly believe people can fully recover, but I think the economic damage might be a very different thing.
Yeah, I mean, the economic side of the things is, of course, somehow inducing a lot of fear into the people, brains, minds, especially when they lose jobs, when they become jobless, when they become, unemployed. Being from the forced factors, just like you said, a lot of companies, at least those giant corporate companies here, were rumored to actually, just halt people, from working, ban people from working, and in case they don't, I don't know, present some sort of, like, COVID passport, like that they were vaxxed, or that they were, somehow not really respecting or obeying the rules that were present during the COVID pandemic. So it does generally seems to have a lot, with the economic side of the things. I could argue it's true. Uh, and knowing, because I was really aware of that personally. I don't really get to do much thinking about the mental health. Perhaps I should be doing much more of it. Uh, do you think, knowing that it is, recoverable, that you can recover it, uh, do you have any special, well, techniques, any special rules you follow, any special, uh, mantras perhaps you follow in terms of practicing your mental health?
This is so interesting because again, what you're pointing to is something that we're so used to doing. We want them to give the mind something to do to get better. And the detachment of from the mind, which is ultimately what we do in the three principles, which is what I teach, that detachment means that there's nothing. If I give the mind something, I'm being additive, and ultimately this is a subtractive psychology. And I was around in the natural health, natural therapy field for many years before I found this. And there's a lot of exercises and affirmations. I mean, I've probably still got books from courses that I did that would tell you what to do, and you may do them for a little while, but nothing's very permanent usually. You do the course, you do the thing for a little while, and then it's gone, and then you kind of revert back. So with this, what we're really pointing to is to not add anything to the mind, to see that there's a you that thinks. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit deeper here. There's a you that thinks, and there's a you that sees your thinking. If there wasn't a you that saw your thoughts, you wouldn't know you were thinking.
It
Yeah,
sounds a little bit. It sounds a little bit. That we're going to refer a little bit to Michael's Neil, right? TEDx performance. I
yeah,
think there is the one. We kind of like Iron Molls, touched upon, behind the scenes before the recording, for everybody's notice. There is a title. Why aren't we awesomer? Right, by Michael Neil. This is one of the TEDx talks I'm pretty sure everybody knows of TEDx talks, so no need to introduce this. But why aren't we awesomer, right? And to the best of my memory, because I watched it quite some time ago, uh, it did regard and it did solve these overall, I should say, problem that many people never seem to realize they have, that there is a difference between the way we interpret the reality around us, the way we actually just see our thoughts, right? and the and the actual reality, that the thoughts, despite, like, let's say there is some phobia, right? Some people are, afraid of, I don't know, tarantulas or some other spiders, that when they see the spider, it's not really the spider itself that is scary, but it's more that what our brains, try to project, that this makes it scary. Isn't it a little bit this way?
Yeah. So if you have a fear, if you have a phobia, you can think, if you can think of that phobia when you're not faced with it, and you get all those feelings of as if it was in front of you, it's your mind. It's nothing to do with the thing that you're scared of. And I think what Michael Neal points to in that video, in that TED talk, which is, I mean, that's had a lot of views, and he's actually one of the top 3 principles teachers in the world. And he came from a background of NLP, interestingly, and then he found the 3 principles, and I think he's been teaching that for over 10 years now. And what he was saying is, that they had a show, and in this show, it's like, well, they were going to test people and their phobias, and the people were there, and they brought out empty boxes, and they said, and these people were all wired up to kind of heart monitors, and they said, these are the boxes the spiders will be in. And then their hearts, even though there was no spiders in the room, their hearts and all their stats started going up, and all their stress levels were really rising. And at that point, he had an insight himself. Well, what's really going on here? What's this power? Like, let's step back away from the world and that it's creating what we think and what we feel, and see that it's always coming from us. So we go from, see, another name for what we teach is, we go from an outside in world to an inside out. We see all our feelings come from us. We see our thoughts come from us. We see the world that we live in actually comes from us, because we're always projecting and seeing the world through our own eyes, and our own eyes are clouded by our belief system, by what we think, what we feel. And we tend to blame the world when we don't need to. So again, it's something a bit deeper with this, where we come back, and we come back into this observer, like, what's really about the human experience. And when we explore that, some really interesting things come up, and we can have some really interesting insights, and we can see a little bit deeper that actually, I'm not a victim of what's going on out there. I'm not a victim of my past. My mind can create that story, but ultimately that isn't what's true. What's true is, so I'm present and I'm here in this moment. That's what's true. You're present and you're here. That's what's true. Our minds could create other things and make that look true right now, but ultimately that isn't what is true. What is true is
Mm-hmm.
this. And I think that's, again, that presence. Everybody's so lost in their minds and stressed, and going 100 miles an hour. And it's like, what happens if we stop and we're present?
Mm-hmm.
And so, see what the 3 principles is. It takes psychology and it takes spirituality, and it shows you that they're both the same thing, and how to understand that, rather than these two separate things that you study and you never really, like, psychology is a really interesting thing to study, but if psychology really worked, would we be in a mental health epidemic? Because everybody's aware of psychological principles now. We understand from a psychological perspective how the mind works. But and then there's spirituality, and there's all those kinds of people that are into that, and they're not very ground. They can be a bit ungrounded. And so what
Mm-hmm.
we do with this is we bring them both together, and we bring them both together through the understanding of thought. And that's a little bit deeper to go into just on this podcast, but
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting exploration. So anyone that's listening that maybe sparked interest, it's, don't just believe me, like, go and explore for yourself, find out about the 3 principles, and see for yourself what you can uncover and what looks true to you. Because when you do, something it's a bit like anything. Once you start on the journey, more of it begins to appear, and more of it makes sense, and you start to uncover this truth of the human experience, and it does make life better. And ultimately, everybody wants a better life. Everybody wants to be happier. Unfortunately, for many people, they're looking in the wrong direction. They've been looking outside of themselves for that to happen, but it was always inside. And then when we can uncover that, when we can touch that space and see that it was always within us, we take the pressure off it having to come from outside of us, which is an illusion anyway. And we kind of we have this innate happiness come through, rather
Hmm.
than this happiness that is dependent and very shaky because it's dependent on the world.
Wow, that this is a broader take on it. You keep referring, Malls, you keep referring to these three principles that I'm not necessarily familiar with. Could you
Yeah.
explain to me and to all the viewers perhaps a little bit more about what that is?
Absolutely. Now, it's really interesting. They're not, to understand the teaching, you don't really have to know exactly what the principles are, because they will come up and evolve in the conversation, but they are very interesting to look at. So, the first, they're the unseen energies that create the human experience. They're nothing that we can touch, nothing that we can feel, nothing that we can see, but we know we have them. So the first one would be thought, which is what we've talked about, and it's probably one of the ones that you talk about the most, because we all have thought. We all know that thought can be complicated and can cause us suffering and can cause us joy. And we all know we have these minds that overthink, as we said earlier. So there's this energy of thought. It's invisible, but we know every moment of our life is coming through us via thought. So that's the first principle. The second principle would be consciousness, which is the awareness that I'm talking about, the fact that we're able to see our own thinking. We have conscious awareness of thought. We have conscious awareness that we are actually having a human experience. So that we can't see, feel, or touch that either, can we? That's an energy. And then we also have um, the third principle is mind, and that isn't mind as in our intellect. Mind would be dependent on who I was working with. How I would explain it would be very different. To somebody that
Hmm.
had no beliefs at all, I would say mind would be nature. We know that there's something miraculous in life. We know that there's an energy, that there's birth, there's death, there's creation, there's destruction. There's something deeper, an energy behind life that we can't see, that's creative. Okay, that would be
Hmm.
mind. If someone was religious, I'd use the word God. If someone was spiritual, I might use universal intelligence. So it really doesn't matter. It's really how that person that you're working with sees that is important, so that they can connect with that for
Gotcha.
themselves. So these three energies are the main source of the human experience that we don't see. And
Okay.
from there, everything else is created.
Hmm. That sounds like a lot of energy. Three princip- three principles. It is wow. It is broad. It is very broad.
Yeah.
Um, and is this is the three principles something that you touch upon throughout the merits of the Twitter Spaces that you host with James.
Yeah, they're very much. I mean, we don't always talk about them as in we go into detail in what they are, but definitely what the understanding gives us, what it shows us about life and the human experience is very much in every episode. And it covered, because every experience is made of the principles, and because all of our, everything comes from thought, really. When we, all our problems, all our good times always come via our own thinking, that every subject that we touches upon that. It can't not. It's hard for people to understand, because they're so used to using the intellect and think that's what's going to solve problems. And it does solve problems, like, you want to trade, or you want to do a maths equation, whatever it may be. Yeah, we've got a great intellect, but for the deeper things, to heal the mind, something else needs to be available. And for me, it's the three principles that are one of the most powerful things that we have in our arsenal to actually help with the mind. And Einstein said you cannot cure a problem from the same level of consciousness that you created it. So if you think about thought, trying to cure thought with thought, it's not going to work. You can't. When we try and, if we're overthinking and we try and use thought to stop overthinking, we're adding more thought.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like, oh, hold on, I know what I'm doing, and a stepping back and going back into that observer, that conscious awareness. That's
Wow.
what's really important here.
Wow, I never looked at it this way. I mean,
Yeah.
I know of Einstein's from more like physical side of the things, in terms of the physics, in terms of his achievements, on the, well, on the overall, yeah, let's call it physics for now, right?
Yeah, so
Because
science,
I
the
yeah, it's
perspective of
just
science. Yeah.
science, yeah, but it does sound intriguing to me how it actually all connects outside of science as well, right? Outside of science, uh you still see the similar connections, right? I wasn't really aware of Einstein actually going there too. But tell me a
Mm.
little bit more about the spaces still, because I know and I read that, well, this is for the 4 months. This is how long it's been taking so far?
Yeah. Yeah, we do them every Thursday at 8 p.m. UK time. Always a different subject, always talking about the same thing because eventually you come back to what we're talking about on this call. We generally have around 300 people overall tune in with the recording as well. Gem and I host it. People come on and ask questions. And so far, they're going very, very well. And we get people reach out and like you just said, they've never thought about it in this way. This is something different for them, and actually, by looking at it in this way, it has really helped them. It's really uncovered something for them, and especially for some people that have had mental health issues, they say, "Wow, I come off your spaces and I feel so much calmer, and I'm seeing things differently, and I'm seeing that." See, what you hear a lot in the beginning when you work with people is that because they've always felt responsible for their own thinking, that they can feel really bad by the fact that they have shitty thinking. They think it's their fault. So
Mhm.
with something like this, when you first come into it and they find out that that's not on them, that thought comes and goes, I say to people, if you're going to choose thought, you would choose amazing thoughts all day, every day. You wouldn't have any bad thinking. So how can it be you choosing? And there's something in the relief when people see that allows them to for their mind to calm, for them to not be taking so much responsibility for their thinking, and just in that, the relationship to their own thinking changes. And so I've had numerous people like DM me or say in the Telegram chat, this is already helping me. Like I really saw something very deeply in this, and
Wow.
what's really beautiful in this is you can't tell someone how quickly the change will happen. So for someone, they might get on one call and they might hear something and it will completely change. And for other people, it may be a bit more incremental. They may have to come on 10 calls or just keep listening, but they'll feel those subtle changes begin to happen. But what I do guarantee is for anybody that stays in the conversation, that change will come, because I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in the 8 years that I've been teaching it in many clients. If Jem was here, she'd say that she'd seen it in herself as well. And I know it can be hard. Again, I really want to point out, I know it's hard to believe when we're so used to being being people that do stuff to get better, to do stuff to get things, that suddenly this woman's coming along and saying, you don't have to do anything. You just have to have this conversation. And once you step a bit further back behind the mind to observe the mind, your mind will heal. That can be like, well, I don't have to do anything. I don't need an affirmation. I don't need to go run around the block 5 times every day. And it's like, well, if you want to go and do those things, that's fine. But this isn't what this is. This is something that fundamentally, the less you interfere with your mind, the more it calms down. And there are reflections of that in nature. If you had a big bucket of dirty water, you wouldn't shake it up to try and get it to clear. You would let it settle. We
Mhm.
use the analogy of a snow globe in the principle as well, because it's like if that snow globe is shaken up and that snow is an example of your thinking, you don't want to get involved when it's all cloudy. You can't see what's in the snow globe. But as the snow settles, as we calm, as there's less thought, you have a better understanding. We don't want to throw more snow in there. We want things to calm down.
Could you then refer to it, because this is the way I read it, that the process itself is healing?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So if I can explain a little bit. So for me, because That's probably my best example. I'd had a really healthy mind. I had a great life. And then at some point in my late 30s, I had a breakdown and I had some very unhealthy thinking. And that unhealthy thinking, while I wasn't in a breakdown state, it lasted for around 7 years. I tried NLP, I tried many, many different therapies. Things would shift a little bit, but I'd go back, and it was, I'd almost accepted that I was probably always going to have a mental health issue, because the mental health world does tell you that once your mind goes in that direction, it's quite hard to cure and get out. You may just have to cope with it or have medication. Well, I didn't do the medication route. I did the route because I'd been in the therapy world for years before in different forms. Um, I decided that would be the route that I would go. And after 7 years, yeah, I was functioning, but was I particularly happy? No. I saw life as something to get through, not something to be lived and enjoyed. And then I came across this, and I didn't see it straight away. I didn't get it straight away. But when I did get it, I had an insight. I saw, it's quite hard to explain, but I saw very, very deeply that thought had created my breakdown, my mental health issues, and everything in my life, really. And that insight into thought allowed me freedom, and my mind healed from there. Not through anything that I did, just through me understanding, through looking in this direction, and having and touching something quite deeply where I saw the truth of it. Just healed my mind. It was quite unbelievable. And from that I was like, wow, what happened here? So instead of yeah, well, I'll just yeah. So instead of kind of not looking into it, I thought, well, I really need to find, instead of just kind of accepting I was happy and moving on. I thought, no, I need to find out what happened to me. I've got that kind of mind. It's like, what actually happened here? And then I explored it a bit deeper. And while I can't quite put my finger on what happened, it was, for me, it was something deeper came through, a deeper truth came through, and it showed me the truth of the human experience, and that changed my life. And then when I looked further into it, because I was stuck, is this just me, or has this happened to lots of people? I saw it happen to many people. Then I started teaching it, and then it just developed from there. Interestingly, I tweeted something a couple of weeks ago. It was a quote, and this quote was then picked up, even though I hadn't. This is really interesting. I hadn't mentioned the three principles in the quote. The quote was then retweeted by Boy George, and Boy George put, what she's talking about here is the three principles. Now, he had
Mhm.
no idea I was teaching the three principles. He had no idea the quote, I saw it as the three principles too, but he had no idea about that because I hadn't mentioned it. And so I reached out to him and I said, that's amazing. That's what I teach. And he went, oh my God, I've been learning about it too. And he said, I'm having a little break at the moment, but that's what I've been studying for the last however long, I can't remember. But um, and yeah, so it was amazing. So this understanding is it again. So for someone like him, will be a great advocate for it. But I know it's doing great work in prisons as well in the UK. I know that it's getting hold in America, and my teacher is actually a doctor of psychology in America.
Mhm.
So it really is starting to kind of gain traction, and a lot of people won't have heard of it, but once you dig in, you'll see that there's many books, there's many webinars, there's other teachers. Obviously, there's me and Jem and Spaces, um, and it's really interesting and different, and that's what I love about it. It's really and effective. That's the most important thing. It's really effective.
Can you argue then that the spaces that you and James actually hold every Thursday, you say at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
GMT? Can you argue that those spaces will let people learn how to control their thoughts?
They will get people to learn how. They will get people to see that they don't need to control their thoughts, because controlling thought, again, is something that is going to be almost impossible to do. Because how can we control an energy that is coming and going constantly all day, every day? And what we're doing there is we're getting back into the identity and back into the making it more solid and real. And it's something we've got to control. If you think about that, what we're saying is, if you can observe thought, it doesn't matter what it's saying, it will come and go, and you won't be so bothered by it. So where, if I'm thinking of this correctly from your point, is where you may have negative thinking and you need to control it. If a negative thought has no meaning, and it's completely neutral, and from that we go into the fact it's just a thought, it's not even really positive or negative, we've just labeled it that way, there's nothing to control. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I mean, I'm finding it very interesting because apparently the way you can control it is by letting it without control to some extent, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like like an interesting, like the point to make in there. Um, like most, I mean, personally, I can understand, how this process, of unminding, just like it's
Yeah.
called, is actually getting, well, more comfort, I think, in terms of how you think, how you process. And for the full clarity for to all the viewers and listeners, I'd never really practiced anything like that. But as we are, just approaching the well, nearing the end of the show, of the podcast with Moss, about the unminding project and the mental health. I've been finding your voice throughout the show so far so soothing that this entire process of hearing itself, is already kind of like making me calmer. So perhaps this is about it, right? Perhaps this this process, just like we could argue, is actually getting you there, despite you don't need to like fully learn, you don't even know how to control. You just need to apparently take a step back, and then kind of like observe it, just put it as an observer, right? uh very interesting takes, very interesting take. um and speaking of the next spaces, which I think are held next Thursday, right?
Yeah.
For everybody who has not managed to join to the most recent one, are there any plans outside of the spaces that you and Jam have in terms of these unminding project? Is this anything bigger that you're planning to turning into, or is it just staying purportedly smaller?
Well, I mean, we're very organic, but we have big plans. So obviously, it's funded by the community. We've had some lovely little donations, and some people have contributed, like a couple of NFTs here and there. So we're hoping that that grows, so that maybe we'll get a bigger sponsor or some bigger donations, because we'd very, very much like to develop a website, a podcast, and I'd really love an app at some point. An app would be great. Um, so again, it's not having too much on it, because actually the most important thing is that we're helping people right now. But I know the potential of how many people we could help. The more listeners we get, the more hearts and minds that we can touch. And I think it's very important to keep it free, which is again why it's on donation, and it could go anywhere. I mean, who knows? We don't know how big it could get. We're definitely looking towards a podcast. We're definitely going to get a website, and yeah, we only need somebody that hears what we're doing, that resonates with us, that says, actually, I want to back you, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. Because me and Jem so I'm the coach. Jem's my co-host who's been helped by it. So she's lovely and personable, and we're very we've got a really good thing going on. But to say we were business minded may not be the we may not be the best business minds in the world, but again, it's organic. Someone will resonate and they'll say, actually, I'd like to help you girls turn this into something bigger. And in the meantime, we'll just take our little steps to grow it in our own way, and we'll just be completely open to wherever it may go. I mean, we're already absolutely thrilled that it's getting 300 plus listeners a week, that we're getting on a podcast like yours and getting to speak to many more people. And yeah, again, we'll see. It will flow with it, and that's a really nice thing as well. To not be so caught up in our minds about where it's going to go, what it has to be. Allow it to be what it's meant to be.
Just let it develop itself, right?
Yes.
This is well, as you know, as we as we've really managed to dive deeper, throughout into the conversation, I think I've been getting more and more understanding in terms of how you think, at least based on our discussion. So this is definitely, uh, like, it perhaps to everybody watching that, you may even see or hear me talk a little bit maybe slower, rather than more slowly than perhaps at the show opening. So this is just, I think, like an evidence just on the spot, right in the spot, that confirms what Molls has been sharing with us so far so kindly throughout the show. And well, I want to definitely kindly encourage everybody, to give special attention and special notice to the Unminding project, to Unminding mental health, ventures that are coming from Moss and from Gem. And if you have a chance, make sure you actually tune in yourself for the next spaces on Thursday, next Thursday, every Thursday, 8 p.m. GMT. I'll do my best to actually tune in myself if I'm around at that time. So it's going to be definitely interesting to see how it goes on the organic side, like from the inside of it. But finally, I would love you most to speak about where people can actually find you and Gem, where people can learn more about the Unminding project. Yeah, and perhaps some final takeaways if you have for our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, we have a Medium article, and I will link that on my Twitter page, and I am at the artist coach. Jem is at Jem says. We have a Telegram page again. That will be that. There's so much in that article, and also all of our um, all of our past episodes are actually available to listen to. We have some on SoundCloud, and there are also some that are still available on Spaces because we record them all. So anybody can actually catch up with a lot of the work that we've already done. So there's that. And obviously, we will have a website soon, and hopefully, we'll have a podcast soon. So there'll be other areas. But for now, you can find us on Twitter. The link to the Medium article is probably the best place and has as much information as anywhere on the project and on me and Jem. And if you're interested, please join our Telegram group and please listen in. We really want to build this up.
Sounds good. Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, what can I say? I mean, I think you can really notice the difference, in the way I talk, in the way I present my words. I
Got
think
you.
I've slowed down. I think I've slowed down a little bit myself here throughout the show. So this is just like I said, yet, uh, you know, just a proof, just an evidence, piece of an evidence that, there is some truth, at least some truth in what Moss has been sharing so kindly and generously with us throughout the show. And that being said, I want to thank you so much, Moss, for joining us on the Nestro podcast. This has been way different podcast than most of the people would probably expect. We didn't really touch upon trading. We didn't really touch upon
Mm.
finances, but I personally love it. This is completely different angle to look at the reality around us. I think many people, perhaps as much as I did, are going to find so much soothing peace and calmness, in this show. So thanks so much, Moss, for joining in again. And final takeaways, final words for our viewers.
I would just like to say thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. It's gone very quickly. And I really appreciate someone with your reach to kind of share what we're doing. And the takeaway, I guess, it would be, you don't have to believe everything you think. There's a deeper part of you, that a deeper awareness, and a place that is always at peace, is always okay. And if you can explore that, and if you can start to challenge your own thinking, you don't have to control thought, but if you can start to maybe think, is this true? All these things that I think that hold me back, all these beliefs that I have that have just made of thought, what areas am I stuck? What areas can I hold this understanding up and shine on my own thinking and see the world and see myself differently, and really thrive? This is something that comes from this understanding, is that a real thriving can happen because suddenly
Wow.
we get out of our own way, and that's a
Wow.
really beautiful thing.
Wow. I love it. It's so soothing. Thanks so much. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, huge shout out to Molls, to Jem for the Unminding Mental Health Project. Everybody, make sure you tune in for the next spaces, Thursday, 8 p.m. GMT. Be there, stay tuned, and I see you guys on the next show. God bless and cheers. Bye bye.